A generation born in slavery, about to inherit the world's most strategic real estate. The book of Joshua is God's masterclass in keeping impossible promises. 4 centuries after telling Abraham, "I'll give you this land," God finally delivers with supernatural warfare that rewrites military history. Rivers stop flowing. Fortified cities crumble without siege engines. Hailstones become divine artillery. Time itself freezes mid-battle. This isn't mythology. It's the documented conquest that shaped civilization. Joshua transforms trembling ex-slaves into an unstoppable force, proving that when the Almighty fights for you, victory isn't just probable, it's inevitable. Every page reveals strategic brilliance, supernatural intervention, and covenant faithfulness that echoes through eternity. This book connects Abraham's faith to David's throne, Moses' law to Christ's kingdom. Get ready for the most spectacular display of divine power in human history. The story begins right after Moses died. Joshua, who had been Moses' assistant for 40 years, suddenly found himself in charge of over 2 million people. Can you imagine that pressure? As we read in chapter 1, verses 1 to 2, "After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, 'Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites.'" God didn't waste time. He immediately told Joshua what needed to happen next. But God knew Joshua was scared. Leading people is hard enough, but leading them into war against giants and fortified cities, that's terrifying. So God did something amazing. 3 times in this conversation, he told Joshua to be strong and brave. First in verse 6, "Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them." Then in verse 7, "Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go." And finally, in verse 9, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." 3 times. God repeated himself because he knew Joshua needed to hear it. When God repeats something, pay attention. Joshua wasn't just getting a pep talk. God was making a promise. Success would come through following his laws, not through military genius or superior weapons. God told him in verse 8, "Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." The secret weapon wasn't swords or shields, it was God's word. Joshua immediately got to work. He called his officers and gave them orders to prepare the people for battle. But there was a problem. 3 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, had already received their land on the east side of the Jordan River. They were comfortable and settled with their families, cattle, and property. Would they really leave everything to help their brothers fight? Joshua didn't beat around the bush. In chapter 1, verses 13 to 15, he reminded them of their promise to Moses. "Remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, 'The Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. Then you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise." Their response was immediate and powerful. These weren't reluctant soldiers being forced into service. Verse 16 records their enthusiastic answer, "Whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go." They didn't hesitate. They didn't make excuses. They didn't negotiate. They understood that God's people succeed together or fail together, but they added something that shows real wisdom and spiritual maturity. In verses 17-18 they said, "Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous." Even they told Joshua to be brave. Sometimes encouragement comes from unexpected places. These warriors recognized that strong leadership was essential for victory. Before crossing the Jordan, Joshua needed intelligence. Jericho sat right in their path, a massive, fortified city that controlled access to the heart of the Promised Land. So Joshua made a smart military decision. Chapter 2, verse 1 tells us, "Then Joshua son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. 'Go, look over the land,' he said, 'especially Jericho.' So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. These spies found themselves in serious trouble when the king of Jericho heard about them. Someone had spotted these foreign men and reported them to the authorities. But Rahab did something nobody expected. Instead of turning them in for a reward, she hid them on her roof under stalks of flax. When the king's men came searching her house, she boldly lied to protect them, telling them in verses 4-5, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." Why would a Canaanite woman risk her life for Israeli spies? This wasn't just random kindness. Rahab had been thinking about Israel's God for years. She explained her reasoning in verses 9-11. "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Rahab wasn't just scared, she was convinced. She had concluded that Israel's God was the true God, and she wanted to be on his side. So she made a deal with the spies in verses 12-13. "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." The spies agreed to her terms. In verse 18, they explained the conditions. "When we enter the land, you must tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers and all your family into your house, we will not be responsible for any of them." A simple red cord would mark the difference between life and death. 3 days later, Joshua gave the order that would change everything. It was time to cross the Jordan River and enter the Promised Land. But this wasn't just any river crossing. The Jordan was at flood stage, swollen with spring rains and snowmelt from Mount Hermon. The rushing water made it impossible to wade across with families, livestock, and all their possessions. But God had a plan that would remind everyone of what he did at the Red Sea 40 years earlier. Joshua gathered all the people and gave them specific instructions in chapter 3, verses 3-4. "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before, but keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it." The Ark of the Covenant represented God's presence among his people. It contained the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's staff that budded, and a jar of manna. When the ark moved, God was leading. Joshua told the people in verse 5, Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." The next morning, Joshua told the priests to pick up the ark and step into the river. This took incredible faith. The river was rushing and deep, and they were carrying the most sacred object in Israel. But the moment their feet touched the water's edge, something miraculous happened. Verse 16 describes it. The water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, that is, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests carrying the ark stood firmly in the middle of the dry riverbed while the entire nation crossed over. Verse 17 says, "The priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground." Over 2 million people walked across what should have been a raging river. God wanted this miracle remembered forever. So he gave Joshua specific instructions in chapter 4, verses 2 to 3. "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." Joshua called the 12 men and explained exactly what God wanted. These weren't just any rocks. They had to come from the exact spot where the priests were standing in the riverbed. In verses 6 to 7, he told them the purpose. "In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." While the 12 men gathered stones from the riverbed, Joshua also set up 12 stones right where the priests were standing in the middle of the Jordan. These would remain underwater as a hidden monument. Then he commanded the priests to come up out of the river. Verse 18 records what happened the moment they stepped onto dry ground. "And the priests came up out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on the dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before." The timing was perfect. God held back the river until every person was safely across, then released it the instant the ark reached the bank. The people camped at Gilgal, where they set up the memorial stones. Joshua explained the bigger picture in verses 23-24. "For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God." At Gilgal, something crucial needed to happen before any battles could begin. All the men born during the 40 years in the wilderness had never been circumcised. This wasn't just a cultural tradition, it was the physical sign of God's covenant with his people, going back to Abraham. Without it, they weren't truly part of God's covenant community. Chapter 5, verse 2 records God's command. "At that time the Lord said to Joshua, 'Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again.'" This was an enormous risk from a military standpoint. Circumcising an entire army would leave them vulnerable and unable to fight for several days while they healed. Any enemy could easily attack and destroy them. But obedience to God came first, even when it didn't make tactical sense. Joshua followed God's command exactly. Verse 8 tells us, "And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed." After the men had healed, they celebrated Passover, the first time they had observed this feast in the Promised Land. Verse 10 tells us, "On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, The Israelites celebrated the Passover. Something amazing happened the very next day. For 40 years, God had provided manna every single morning. This supernatural bread had kept them alive in the desert. But now that they were in the promised land, the manna stopped. Verse 12 says, "The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan." The wilderness period was officially over. Then Joshua had an encounter that changed everything. While he was near Jericho, probably planning the attack, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. This wasn't one of his soldiers. Joshua didn't know if this was friend or enemy, so he challenged him directly. The man's answer in verse 14 was shocking. "Neither. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." This wasn't just an angel. This was God himself appearing as a warrior. Joshua immediately understood. He fell face down in reverence and asked, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The divine commander told Joshua in verse 15, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." Just like Moses at the burning bush, Joshua was standing on holy ground in the presence of the Almighty. Now came the moment everyone had been waiting for: the attack on Jericho. This massive city controlled the entrance to Canaan. Its walls were so thick that houses were built on top of them. It seemed impossible to capture, but God had an unusual battle plan that would demonstrate his power to both Israel and their enemies. Chapter 6, verses 2 to 5, record his detailed instructions. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in." This made absolutely no military sense. Armies don't capture fortified cities by walking around them and playing music. Where were the siege engines? The battering rams? The ladders for scaling walls? But God's ways are not human ways. His strategy would demonstrate that victory comes through faith and obedience, not military technology. Joshua gathered the priests and army commanders and explained the plan exactly as God had given it. In verse 10, he gave them one crucial instruction that required incredible discipline. Do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout. Imagine thousands of warriors marching in complete silence while their enemies watched from the walls. For 6 days, they followed God's plan to the letter. Every morning, the armed men led the procession, followed by 7 priests, blowing ram's horn trumpets in front of the Ark of the Covenant, with more armed men bringing up the rear. They marched around Jericho once each day in total silence, except for the sound of the trumpets. The people of Jericho watched from their walls, probably laughing at this strange parade. They had never seen anything like it, but something was building. God was preparing for a miracle that would shake the ancient world. On the 7th day, everything changed. They got up at dawn and began their march. But this time they didn't stop after 1 lap. Verse 15 tells us, on the 7th day they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. Can you imagine the tension building with each lap? The priests kept blowing their trumpets, the people kept their silence, the army kept marching. After 6 days of this strange ritual, everyone knew something big was about to happen. The people of Jericho were probably getting nervous. What were these Israelites planning? After the 7th lap, the priests blew one long, loud blast on their trumpets, different from all the previous trumpet calls. Joshua shouted the command everyone had been waiting 6 days to hear, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And what happened next defied every law of physics and engineering known to man. Verse 20 records the impossible. When the trumpets sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. The massive walls of Jericho, walls that had protected the city for centuries, walls so thick that people lived in houses built on top of them, simply collapsed into rubble. Not from earthquakes or explosives or siege engines, but from the power of God responding to His people's faith and obedience. The Israeli army poured into the city through the gaps where the walls had been and captured it completely. They followed God's instructions to destroy everything in the city as an offering to Him. But in the middle of total destruction, there was beautiful mercy. The spies remembered their promise to Rahab. Verses 22 to 23 tell us, Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Rahab and her family were the only survivors in all of Jericho because she had faith in Israel's God. The scarlet cord in her window had protected them exactly as promised. The first victory in the Promised Land was complete, achieved not through human strength or clever tactics, but through the awesome power of the God who keeps His promises. After the amazing victory at Jericho, Israel felt unstoppable. But something was terribly wrong, though nobody knew it yet. Chapter 7, verse 1, reveals the problem. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Joshua had no idea about this hidden sin. He was already planning the next attack. It was a small city compared to Jericho, so Joshua sent spies to check it out. When they returned, they were confident. In verses 2 to 3, they told Joshua, "Not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there." So Joshua sent about 3,000 men to attack Ai. What happened next shocked everyone. Verse 4 to 5 tells the devastating story. So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. 36 Israelite soldiers died in a battle that should have been easy. This was their first defeat since entering the Promised Land, and it hit like a thunderbolt. The army that had just watched walls collapse at Jericho was running in terror from a tiny city. Joshua was devastated. He didn't understand what had gone wrong. In verses 6 to 9, we see his desperate prayer. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell, face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, "Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?" Joshua was heartbroken and confused. He thought maybe God had abandoned them, but the real problem was hidden sin in the camp. God's answer to Joshua was direct and shocking. In chapter 7, verses 10-12, the Lord told him, "Stand up, What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen, they have lied, they have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. God wasn't playing games. Someone had stolen things from Jericho that were supposed to be destroyed or given to God's treasury. Until this sin was dealt with, Israel would keep losing battles. God gave Joshua specific instructions for finding the guilty person. It would be done systematically, narrowing down from tribe to clan to family to individual. The next morning, Joshua gathered all Israel and began the process. Verse 16-18 shows how it worked. Early the next morning, Joshua had Israel come forward by tribes, and Judah was chosen. The clans of Judah came forward, and the Zerahites were chosen. He had the clan of the Zerahites come forward by families, and Zimri was chosen. Joshua had his family come forward man by man, and Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, was chosen. Imagine the tension as each level was narrowed down. Thousands of people watching, families holding their breath, and finally one man was identified. Achan, Joshua spoke gently to him. In verse 19, "My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me." Achan knew he was caught. His confession, in verse 20-21, revealed everything. "It is true, I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent, with the silver underneath." Joshua sent messengers to Achan's tent, and they found everything exactly as he had described. The stolen items were brought before the Lord as evidence. Then came the terrible punishment. Achan, his family, his livestock, and all his possessions were taken to the valley of Achor. There they were stoned to death and burned. Verse 26 ends. The tragic story. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. So that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since. With the sin removed, God was ready to fight for Israel again. Chapter 8, verse 1 shows God's immediate response. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai, for I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city and his land." This time, God gave Joshua a detailed battle plan. It wasn't just marching around walls. This required military strategy and tactics. God told him in verse 2, "You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city." Joshua chose 30,000 of his best fighting men for a night mission. He sent them to hide behind Ai while he prepared the main army for a frontal attack. In verses 4-8 he explained the plan. "When you have taken the city, set it on fire, do what the Lord has commanded, see to it you have my orders." The strategy was brilliant. The main army would pretend to retreat, drawing Ai's forces out of the city, while the hidden ambush force would capture the empty city behind them. The plan worked perfectly. When Joshua led the main army toward Ai, the next morning, the king of Ai saw them coming and rushed out with all his forces, thinking it would be another easy victory. Verse 14 says, "When the king of Ai saw this, he and all the men of the city hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in battle at a certain place overlooking the Arabah. But he did not know that an ambush had been set against him behind the city. Joshua and his men pretended to be beaten and fled toward the wilderness. All the men of Ai chased after them, leaving their city completely undefended. Then Joshua raised his javelin as the signal, and the ambush force captured Ai and set it on fire. When the men of Ai looked back and saw smoke rising from their city, they panicked. They were trapped between two Israeli forces with nowhere to run. Verse 22 describes the complete victory. Those in the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle, with Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. The king of Ai was captured alive and brought to Joshua. By the end of the day, 12,000 people had died, and Ai was completely destroyed. But this time, Israel was allowed to keep the livestock and plunder for themselves. After the victory at Ai, Joshua did something that showed his wisdom as a leader. He didn't immediately rush into the next battle. Instead, he led the entire nation to Mount Ebal to renew their covenant with God. This wasn't Joshua's idea. Moses had commanded them to do this when they entered the Promised Land. Chapter 8, verses 30 to 32 describe what Joshua built. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the Law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on stones a copy of the Law of Moses. This wasn't just a religious ceremony, it was a national event. Verse 33 tells us who was there. All the Israelites with their elders, officials, and judges were standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native-born were there. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Then Joshua did something amazing. He read the entire law of Moses to everyone gathered there. Verse 34-35 emphasizes how complete this was. Afterward, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did, not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. Every single person heard God's law read aloud, men, women, children, and even foreigners who had joined Israel. This wasn't just about remembering rules, it was about renewing their relationship with God before continuing the conquest. While Israel was renewing their covenant, news of their victories was spreading throughout Canaan. Most cities prepared for war, but one group had a different plan. The Gibeonites decided to trick Israel into making peace with them. Chapter 9 verses 3-6 describe their clever scheme. However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. They put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the Israelites, "We have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us." The Israelites were immediately suspicious. In verse 7 they asked, "But perhaps you live near us, so how can we make a treaty with you?" God had forbidden Israel from making treaties with nearby nations who should be completely destroyed, but the Gibeonites had prepared their story well. In verses 9-13 they explained, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. For we have heard reports of him, all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, Sihon king of Heshbon, and Og king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all those living in our country said to us, 'Take provisions for your journey. Go and meet them, and say to them, "We are your servants. Make a treaty with us."' This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you. But now see how dry and moldy it is. And these wineskins that we filled were new, but see how cracked they are. And our clothes and sandals are worn out by the very long journey." The evidence looked convincing. Moldy bread, cracked wineskins, worn-out clothes and sandals. The Israelite leaders examined everything and believed the story. But verse 14 reveals their critical mistake. The Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. They forgot to pray. They forgot to ask God for wisdom. They made the decision based only on what they could see and touch. Joshua and the leaders made a peace treaty with the Gibeonites and swore an oath to let them live. 3 days later, they discovered the truth. The Gibeonites lived nearby. They were exactly the kind of people Israel was supposed to destroy. The Israelites were angry, but they couldn't break their oath. Verse 19 shows their dilemma. But all the leaders answered, "We have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now." The Gibeonites became servants to Israel, cutting wood and carrying water for the tabernacle, but the damage was done. Israel had been tricked because they trusted their own judgment instead of seeking God's guidance. The peace treaty with Gibeon created an immediate crisis. 5 powerful Amorite kings from Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon were furious that Gibeon had made peace with Israel. Chapter 10, verse 5 tells us their response. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. Gibeon sent messengers racing to Joshua at Gilgal. Their desperate message in verse 6 was, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us." Joshua faced a difficult decision. The Gibeonites had tricked him, but Israel had sworn an oath to protect them. Sometimes doing the right thing means honoring your commitments even when you've been deceived. God made the decision easy. Verse 8 records his promise. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." Joshua made a brilliant tactical move. He marched his army all night from Gilgal to Gibeon, covering about 25 miles in darkness. The surprise attack worked perfectly. Verse 9-10 describes the battle. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel. So Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth-horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. But God wasn't finished. As the enemy armies fled, he sent a devastating hailstorm. Verse 11 says, "As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth-horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them, and more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites." Then Joshua did something that has amazed people for thousands of years. He prayed for the sun to stand still so they could complete their victory before darkness fell. Verses 12-14 record this incredible event. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Jashar. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. God actually stopped the sun for Joshua's prayer. The battle continued in extended daylight until the victory was complete. The 5 kings tried to hide in a cave at Makkedah, but they were captured and brought to Joshua. He had his commanders put their feet on the necks of these kings as a symbol of complete victory, then executed them all. With the five-king coalition defeated, Joshua launched a systematic campaign to conquer the entire southern region. He didn't. Returned to camp between battles. He kept his army in the field and struck one city after another before they could organize a defense. First was Makkedah itself. Chapter 10, verse 28 records the pattern that would be repeated. That day, Joshua took Makkedah. He put the city and its king to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it. He left no survivors, and he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Next came Libnah. Verse 29-30 tells us, Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved on from Makkedah to Libnah and attacked it. The Lord also gave that city and its king into Israel's hand. The city and everyone in it Joshua put to the sword. He left no survivors there, and he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. The campaign continued with lightning, speed. Lachish fell in 2 days despite reinforcements from Gaza. Verse 32 says, The Lord gave Lachish into Israel's hands, and Joshua took it on the 2nd day. The city and everyone in it he put to the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. Eglon was conquered in just 1 day. Verse 35 records, They captured it that same day and put it to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it, just as they had done to Lachish. Then Joshua turned toward the hill country and attacked Hebron. This was one of the largest and most important cities in the region. Verse 37 shows, It fell just as quickly. They took the city and put it and its king and its villages and everyone in it to the sword. They left no survivors. Just as at Eglon, they totally destroyed it and everyone in it. Finally, Joshua attacked Debir and captured it completely. Verse 39 concludes this phase. They took the city, its king and its villages, and put them to the sword. Everyone in it they totally destroyed. They left no survivors. They did to Debir and its king as they had done to Libnah and its king and to Hebron. In a matter of weeks, Joshua had conquered the entire southern region of Canaan. Verse 40 summarizes the complete victory. So Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills and the mountain slopes. Together with all their kings, he left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. News of Israel's southern victories reached the northern kingdoms, and they knew they had to act fast, or be destroyed one by one. King Jabin of Hazor organized the largest military coalition ever assembled against Israel. Chapter 11, verses 1-5, describe this massive alliance. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent word to Jobab, king of Madon, to the kings of Shimron and Dakshaph, and to the northern kings who were in the mountains, in the Arabah south of Kinnereth, in the western foothills, and in Naphoth Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and west, to the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, and Jebusites in the hill country, and to the Hivites below Hermon in the region of Mizpah. They came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. This army was enormous, more soldiers than Israel had ever faced, plus horses and chariots which Israel didn't have. They gathered at the waters of Merom, confident that their superior numbers and equipment would crush the Israelites. But God told Joshua not to be afraid. Verse 6 records his promise, Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them, slain, over to Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. Joshua decided on another surprise attack. He moved his army quickly to the waters of Merom and struck before the coalition was ready. Verse 78 describes the battle. So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Misrephoth-Maim, and to the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. The victory was complete and devastating. Joshua followed God's commands exactly, destroying the horses and chariots that might have tempted Israel to trust in military power instead of God. Joshua then captured and burned Hazor, the most important city in northern Canaan. Verse 13 explains his strategy. Yet Israel did not burn any of the cities built on their mounds, except Hazor, which Joshua burned. Hazor was the center of northern resistance, so its destruction sent a clear message to everyone else. Chapter 12 provides a complete list of all the kings Joshua defeated, 31 in total. This wasn't just random fighting, it was the systematic conquest of the Promised Land, exactly as God had commanded. From the first victory at Jericho to the final battles in the north, God had fought for Israel and given them victory over every enemy. Joshua was getting old. The great warrior who had led Israel across the Jordan and conquered 31 kings was now an elderly man. But there was still work to be done. Chapter 13, verse 1, sets the scene. When Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over." God didn't hide the fact that the job wasn't finished. He spelled out exactly what remained unconquered. In verses 2 to 6, he listed the territories. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and Geshurites, from the Shihor River on the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron on the north. All of it counted as Canaanite, though, held by the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. The territory of the Avites on the south, all the land of the Canaanites, from Ara of the Sidonians as far as Aphek and the border of the Amorites, the area of Byblos, and all Lebanon to the east, from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath. That was a lot of unconquered land. The coastal regions controlled by the powerful Philistines. The northern territories in Lebanon, pockets of resistance scattered throughout the hill country. Joshua might have felt discouraged, thinking he had failed to complete his mission, but God had a different perspective. He told Joshua something amazing in verse 6. "As for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions from Lebanon to Misrephoth-Maim, that is, all the Sidonians, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have instructed you." God wasn't upset about the unfinished conquest. He would take care of the remaining enemies himself. What mattered now was dividing the land among the tribes. Even though some territories weren't fully conquered yet, God wanted Joshua to distribute them anyway. This showed incredible faith, giving away land that was still occupied by enemies. God's command was clear in verse 7, "And divide it as an inheritance among the 9 tribes and half of the tribe of Manasseh." The time had come to transform Israel from a wandering nation into settled tribes with permanent homes. Before dividing the western territories, the book records the inheritance of the tribes that had already settled on the east side of the Jordan River. Chapter 13, verse 8 reminds us, "The other half of Manasseh, the Reubenites and the Gadites, had received the inheritance that Moses had given them east of the Jordan, as he, the servant of the Lord, had assigned it to them." The tribe of Reuben received the southern portion of the eastern territory. Verses 15-23 describe their boundaries in detail, including cities like Heshbon, Dibon, and Bamoth Baal. This was good grazing land, perfect for their cattle and sheep. Gad received the middle section, with territories that included Jazer and all the towns of Gilead. Their inheritance stretched from the Jordan River to the Ammonite border. Verses 24-28 show that God gave them exactly what they needed for their lifestyle as cattle herders. The eastern half of Manasseh got the largest portion, extending all the way to the region of Bashan. Verses 29-31 list their cities, including Ashtaroth and Edrei, former strongholds of King Og. These were the descendants of Machir, Manasseh's son, and they became known as fierce warriors. But one group received no land at all. Verse 14 explains, "But to the tribe of Levi he gave no inheritance, since the food offerings presented to the Lord, the God of Israel, are their inheritance, as he promised them." The Levites were different from all other tribes. This principle is repeated again in verse 33. But to the tribe of Levi, Moses had given no inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance, as he promised them. Instead of owning territory, the Levites would serve as priests and teachers throughout all the other tribes. Their provision would come from the offerings and tithes of the people. God himself was their inheritance, a spiritual treasure far greater than any piece of land. Among all the people waiting to receive their inheritance, one man stood out. Caleb, now 85 years old, had been waiting 45 years to claim a specific promise. He approached Joshua with confidence and joy. Chapter 14, verses 6-9 record his remarkable speech. Now the Israelites approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. So on that day, Moses swore to me, 'The land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God.'" Caleb was one of the 12 spies sent to scout the Promised Land decades earlier. While 10 spies brought back fearful reports about giants and fortified cities, only Caleb and Joshua had faith that God would give them victory. For this faithful stand, Moses had promised Caleb a special inheritance. Now, after 45 years of waiting, Caleb was ready to claim that promise. But listen to his incredible words in verses 10-11. "Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then." 85 years old and still strong, God had preserved Caleb's health and energy for this moment. But Caleb wasn't asking for easy retirement land. He wanted the hardest territory of all. In verse 12, he made his bold request, "Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day." You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Caleb wanted the mountains where the giants lived. At 85, he was ready to fight the Anakites, the same giants who had terrified the other spies decades earlier. Joshua was thrilled with Caleb's faith and courage. Verse 13-14 shows his response. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Caleb received Hebron, one of the most important cities in the land. It had been the home of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and true to his word, this 85-year-old warrior drove out the giants and claimed his inheritance. Faith and patience had been rewarded with the victory God had promised decades earlier. When it came time to divide the western territories, Judah went first. This wasn't random. God had special plans for this tribe. Chapter 15 gives the most detailed description of any tribal territory, showing its future importance. Judah's southern boundary started at the Dead Sea and extended to the border of Edom. Verse 1 describes it. The allotment for the tribe of Judah, according to its clans, extended down to the territory of Edom, to the desert of Zin in the extreme south. This gave them control of important trade routes to the south. The western boundary was the Mediterranean Sea, giving Judah access to coastal trade and fishing. The northern boundary was complex, running through the hill country and including many important cities. The eastern boundary followed the Dead Sea and Jordan River. Within these boundaries were some of the most significant cities in the land. Jerusalem was located on Judah's northern border. Bethlehem, the future birthplace of King David, was in Judah's territory. Hebron, which Caleb had claimed, was also part of Judah's inheritance. But Judah couldn't conquer all their cities immediately. Verse 63 honestly admits Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the people of Judah. Jerusalem would remain unconquered for centuries until King David finally captured it. The chapter also mentions other unconquered areas, showing that the settlement process would take time. Some Canaanite cities were too strong to capture immediately. Others were allowed to remain as forced laborers. The conquest wasn't an overnight transformation. It was a gradual process of settlement and consolidation. Judah's extensive territory reflected God's special plans for this tribe. From Judah would come King David, and eventually the Messiah. The detailed boundaries preserved in chapter 15 show that God was preparing the stage for his future redemption plan through this royal tribe. The tribes descended from Joseph. Ephraim and the western half of Manasseh received their inheritance in the central hill country. This was good land with fertile valleys and strategic locations. But instead of being grateful, they complained. Chapter 16 describes Ephraim's territory, which included important cities and excellent farming land. They received exactly what God intended for them. Chapter 17 details western Manasseh's portion, which was also substantial and valuable, but the Joseph tribes weren't satisfied. In chapter 17, verse 14, they came to Joshua with a complaint. The people of Joseph said to Joshua, "Why have you given us only one allotment and one portion for an inheritance? We are a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly." They thought their territory was too small for their large population. They wanted more land without having to work for it. This revealed a troubling attitude. They were more focused on what they didn't have than on what God had graciously given them. Joshua's response was brilliant. Instead of giving them more territory, he challenged them to use what they already had. In verse 15 he said, "If you are so numerous, and if the hill country of Ephraim is too small for you, go up into the forest and clear land for yourselves. They're in the land of the Perizzites and Rephites." In other words, if you need more space, go cut down trees and make room. There was plenty of forested land in their territory that could be cleared for farming and cities. They didn't need more territory. They needed more work ethic. But the Joseph tribes had another complaint. In verses 16 to 18, they explained their real problem. The people of Joseph replied, "The hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both those in Beth-shan and its settlements, and those in the valley of Jezreel." But Joshua said to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, "You are numerous and very powerful. You will have not only one allotment, but the forested hill country as well. Clear it, and its farthest limits will be yours. Though the Canaanites have chariots fitted with iron, and though they are strong, you can drive them out." They were afraid of the Canaanites with iron chariots. Instead of trusting God to help them overcome these enemies, they wanted easier land somewhere else. Joshua refused to enable their lack of faith. He told them they were strong enough to defeat the Canaanites. and claim the valleys for themselves. This exchange revealed an important truth. God's blessings often come through challenges, not around them. The Joseph tribes had everything they needed: good land, large population, and God's promises. What they lacked was the faith and determination to fully possess their inheritance. After Judah, Ephraim, and Western Manasseh had received their territories, something important happened. Chapter 18, verse 1 records, "The whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The country was brought under their control." Shiloh became the new central worship location. For years, the tabernacle had moved with the people through the wilderness. Now, it had a permanent home in the heart of the Promised Land. This was a major milestone. Israel was no longer a wandering nation, but a settled people with a fixed place of worship. But Joshua noticed a problem. 7 tribes still hadn't received their inheritance. They seemed content to stay in temporary camps instead of claiming the land God had promised them. This couldn't continue. Joshua called all Israel together and challenged the remaining tribes. In verses 2 to 3, he asked them directly, "How long will you wait before you begin to take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you?" This was a leadership moment. Joshua could see that some people were becoming lazy and complacent. They were satisfied with just surviving instead of fully possessing what God had promised. As their leader, he needed to motivate them to action. Joshua proposed a practical solution. In verses 4 to 6, he outlined his plan. "Appoint 3 men from each tribe. I will send them out to make a survey of the land and to write a description of it according to the inheritance of each. Then they will return to me. You are to divide the land into 7 parts. Judah is to remain in its territory on the south, and the tribes of Joseph in their territory on the north. After you have written descriptions of the 7 parts of the land, bring them here to me, and I will cast lots for you in the presence of the Lord our God." This was smart planning. Instead of making random divisions, Joshua wanted detailed surveys of the remaining territory. Each tribe would receive land suited to their needs and size. The process would be fair and orderly, conducted in God's presence. At the tabernacle, the survey team did their work thoroughly. Verse 9 tells us, "So the men left and went through the land. They wrote its description on a scroll, town by town, in 7 parts, and returned to Joshua in the camp at Shiloh." Now they were ready for the final distributions. The remaining tribes would receive their inheritances through the sacred casting of lots, ensuring that God himself determined where each tribe would live. Benjamin was the first tribe to receive their inheritance from the remaining territories. Chapter 18, verse 11, describes their allotment. The lot came up for the tribe of Benjamin according to its clans. Their allotted territory lay between the tribes of Judah and Joseph. This was a strategic location. Benjamin's small territory included some of the most important places in the land. Their northern border touched Ephraim, and their southern border touched Judah. This made Benjamin a bridge between the powerful northern and southern tribes. Most significantly, Jerusalem was located on Benjamin's border with Judah. Verse 28 lists Jerusalem among Benjamin's cities: Zelah, Haleph, the Jebusite city, that is Jerusalem, Gibeah and Kiriath, 14 towns and their villages. This was the inheritance of Benjamin for its clans. Benjamin also received Jericho, the first city conquered in the Promised Land. Other important cities included Bethel, where Jacob had his famous dream about angels ascending and descending a ladder to heaven. Gibeon, where the sun had stood. Still, for Joshua, was also in Benjamin's territory. Even though Benjamin was one of the smallest tribes, they received some of the most significant real estate in the entire land. Their territory would later become the heart of the United Kingdom under David and Solomon. The temple would be built on their border with Judah. Many crucial events in Israel's history would take place in Benjamin's small but important inheritance. The Detailed boundary descriptions in verses 12-20 show how carefully the territory was surveyed and allocated. Every landmark, every city, every geographical feature was precisely recorded. This wasn't random distribution, it was careful planning that considered each tribe's needs and future role in Israel's history. Benjamin's central location between the major tribes would make them important mediators and allies. Their inheritance demonstrated that in God's kingdom, significance isn't determined by size, but by purpose and position in His plan. The remaining 6 tribes quickly received their inheritances through the lot-casting process at Shiloh. Each tribe's portion was carefully determined and recorded for posterity. Simeon was the first to be allocated. Chapter 19, verse 1 tells us, "The second lot came out for the tribe of Simeon according to its clans. Their inheritance lay within the territory of Judah." Simeon's territory was actually inside Judah's borders in the southern region. Verse 9 explains why. The inheritance of the Gibeonites was taken from the share of Judah because Judah's portion was more than they needed. So the Gibeonites received their inheritance within the territory of Judah. Zebulun received their portion in the northern hill country. Verses 10-16 describe their boundaries, which included important trade routes connecting the Mediterranean coast to the inland regions. This location would make them prosperous merchants and traders. Issachar got the fertile valleys east of Mount Carmel. Their territory, described in verses 17-23, included some of the best farmland in all of Israel. The valley of Jezreel, famous for its rich soil, was part of Issachar's inheritance. Asher received the northern coastal region, including access to Mediterranean ports. Verses 24-31 show they controlled important Phoenician trade connections. Their territory extended to the borders of modern-day Lebanon, giving them opportunities for international commerce. Naphtali got the mountainous region around the Sea of Galilee. Their inheritance, detailed in verses 32-39, included the fertile shores of the lake and the hills rising above it. This beautiful territory would later be home to many of Jesus' ministry activities. Dan initially received territory in the central coastal plain, but they had problems. Verse 47 explains, when the territory of the Danites was lost to them, they went up and attacked Leshem, took it, put it to the sword, and occupied it. They settled in Leshem and named it Dan after their forefather. Unable to conquer their assigned territory because of strong Philistine resistance, the Danites migrated north and conquered a city in the far north of the land. Finally, Joshua himself received his personal inheritance. Verses 49-50 record this touching moment. When they had finished dividing the land into its allotted portions, the Israelites gave Joshua son of Nun an inheritance among them, as the Lord had commanded. They gave him the town he asked for, Timnath, Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, and he built up the town and settled there. Joshua could have claimed the best territory for himself. As the leader who had conquered the land, he deserved prime real estate. Instead, he waited until everyone else was satisfied, then asked for a simple town in the hills. He rebuilt it with his own hands and made it his home. Verse 51 concludes this massive undertaking. These are the territories that Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel assigned by lot at Shiloh in the presence of the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And so they finished dividing the land. The promised land was now divided. Each tribe had their inheritance. The wandering was over, and the settlement had begun. After every tribe had received their inheritance and the land was completely divided, there was one final distribution to be made. Joshua, the man who had led them across the Jordan, conquered their enemies and overseen the entire settlement process, had not yet claimed his own reward. This wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. Chapter 19, verses 49-50, record this beautiful moment of servant leadership. When they had finished dividing the land into its allotted portions, the Israelites gave Joshua, son of Nun, an inheritance among them, as the Lord had commanded. They gave him the town he asked for, Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, and he built up the town and settled there. Notice something amazing here. The people gave Joshua his inheritance. They offered it to him. He hadn't demanded the best territory for himself. He hadn't used his position as leader to grab prime real estate while others waited. Joshua had patiently overseen everyone else's needs first, making sure every family and clan was settled before thinking about his own situation. And what did this great conqueror ask for? Not a palace in Jerusalem, not the fertile valleys of Jezreel, not the coastal plains with their trade routes. Joshua requested a simple town in the hill country of Ephraim called Timnath-Serah. The name literally means portion of the sun, perhaps a reminder of that incredible day when the sun stood still at his prayer. Verse 50 tells us something else remarkable. And he built up the town and settled there. Joshua didn't just move into a ready-made city. At his advanced age, after decades of military campaigns and leadership responsibilities, he rolled up his sleeves and rebuilt this town with his own hands. This wasn't the behavior of someone who felt entitled to luxury. This was a man who understood that real leadership means serving others and being willing to work hard even in retirement. The final verse of this section, verse 51, emphasizes how proper and orderly this entire process had been. These are the territories that Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel assigned by lot at Shiloh in the presence of the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And so they finished dividing the land. Everything had been done correctly in God's presence, with proper spiritual oversight from Eleazar the priest, and with the agreement of all the tribal leaders. The land division was complete, fair, and blessed by God. Joshua's personal reward came last, exactly as it should for a true servant leader who puts others before himself. With the land divided among the tribes, God gave instructions for establishing a special system of justice and mercy. Not all killings were the same. Some were intentional murders, but others were tragic accidents. God's law needed to account for both situations while protecting innocent people from revenge. Chapter 20, verse 1-3, records God's command to Joshua. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge, as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood." In ancient times, when someone was killed, their nearest relative had the right and duty to avenge their death by killing the murderer. This was called being the avenger of blood. But what if the killing had been completely accidental? What if someone was chopping wood and the axe head flew off and struck another person? Should that person die for a tragic accident? God's answer was the cities of refuge. These were special cities scattered throughout Israel where someone who had killed accidentally could run for protection. Once they reached a city of refuge, they were safe from the avenger of blood until their case could be properly judged. The process was carefully designed to be fair to everyone involved. Verses 4-6 explain how it worked. When they flee to one of these cities, they are to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state their case before the elders of that city. Then the elders are to admit the fugitive into their city and provide a place to live among them. If the avenger of blood comes in pursuit, the elders must not surrender the fugitive, because the fugitive killed their neighbor unintentionally and without malice aforethought. They are to stay in that city until they have stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then they may go back to their own home in the town from which they fled. This system balanced justice with mercy perfectly. The person had to explain their case to city elders. They couldn't just claim it was an accident without evidence. If the elders believed their story, they were protected until a proper trial could be held. If found innocent of intentional murder, they could live safely in the city of refuge until the high priest died, at which point they received complete freedom. 6 cities were chosen for this purpose, strategically located so that anyone in Israel could reach one within a day's journey. Verses 7-9 list them. So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. East of the Jordan, on the other side from Jericho, they designated Bezer in the wilderness, on the plateau in the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead in the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan in the tribe of Manasseh. Any of the Israelites or any foreigner residing among them who killed someone accidentally could flee to these designated cities and not be killed by the avenger of blood prior to standing trial before the assembly. Notice that these cities were available to foreigners too, not just Israelites. God's justice extended to everyone living in the land, regardless of their nationality. This showed the inclusive nature of God's mercy and his concern for true justice, rather than tribal favoritism. The Levites had been told they would receive no territorial inheritance like the other tribes, but they still needed places to live and pasture land for their animals. Chapter 21 begins with their request to receive what had been promised to them through Moses. Verses 1-3 show the Levites approaching the leaders. Now the family heads of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the other tribal families of Israel at Shiloh in Canaan, and said to them, "The Lord commanded through Moses that you give us towns to live in, with pasture lands for our livestock." So the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own inheritance, as the Lord had commanded. This was a significant sacrifice for the other tribes. They had to give up some of their best cities and surrounding pasture lands to provide for the Levites. But they did it willingly, because God had commanded it. The distribution was done fairly through casting lots, just like the tribal inheritances had been. The Levites were divided into 3 main family groups based on the sons of Levi: Kohath, Gershon, and Merari. Each group received cities appropriate to their role in Israel's worship system. The Kohathites, who included Aaron's descendants, the priests, received the most important cities. Verses 4-8 explain, the first lot came out for the Kohathites, according to their clans. The Levites, who were descendants of Aaron the priest, were allotted 13 towns from the tribes of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. The rest of Kohath's descendants were allotted 10 towns from the clans of the tribes of Ephraim, Dan, and half of Manasseh. The descendants of Gershon were allotted 13 towns from the clans of the tribes of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and the half-tribe of Manasseh in Bashan. The descendants of Merari, according to their clans, received 12 towns from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. So the Israelites allotted to the Levites these towns and their pasture lands, as the Lord had commanded through Moses. The total came to 48 cities, spread throughout all the tribal territories. This wasn't random, it was strategic. By scattering the Levites throughout the entire nation, God ensured that every region would have spiritual leaders, teachers, and worship centers nearby. Some of the most important cities in Israel became Levitical cities. Jerusalem, Hebron, Shechem, and Kadesh were among them. Many of the cities of refuge were also Levitical cities, which made sense since the Levites were experts in God's law and could properly judge difficult cases. The detailed list in verses 9-42 shows exactly which cities each Levitical family received, along with the pasture lands around them. This provided the Levites with everything they needed to support their families while serving God and teaching his people. They had homes, food for their livestock, and the dignity of meaningful work in service to the Lord. This system created a network of spiritual influence throughout the entire nation. No matter where an Israelite lived, they had access to Levitical teaching and priestly ministry. The Levites became the backbone of Israel's religious education system, preserving God's law and maintaining proper worship practices in every region. With the land divided and the cities established, the book of Joshua pauses to make one of the most important declarations in all of Scripture. This isn't just a summary of what had happened. It's a theological statement about God's character and faithfulness. Chapter 21, verses 43 to 45, contain this powerful proclamation. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their ancestors, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their ancestors. Not one of their enemies withstood them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hands. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. Read that again slowly. Every single promise God had made was fulfilled. Not most of them, not the important ones, everyone. When God makes a promise, he keeps it completely. Think about what this meant. Hundreds of years earlier, God had promised Abraham that his descendants would inherit this land. He had repeated that promise to Isaac, to Jacob, and to Moses. Through 4 centuries of slavery in Egypt, through 40 years of wilderness wandering, through moments of doubt and rebellion and failure, God had remembered his promise. The phrase, "Not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed," is one of the strongest statements about God's faithfulness in the entire Bible. It establishes a pattern that runs throughout Scripture. God always keeps his word, even when circumstances make it seem impossible. This wasn't just about military victory. Verse 44 specifically mentions that the Lord gave them rest on every side. After centuries of slavery, wandering, and warfare, Israel finally had peace. They could plant crops without fear of invasion. They could build homes and raise families in safety. They could worship God in the land he had chosen for them. The word rest here is significant. It doesn't just mean the absence of war. It means the presence of God's blessing and security. This was the rest that God had always intended for his people, a place where they could live in relationship with him without fear or want. But this rest came with responsibility. The land was theirs, but they needed to maintain their relationship with God to keep it. The enemies were defeated, but only as long as Israel remained faithful to their covenant with the Lord. The phrase, "Not one of their enemies withstood them," shows that victory came from God, not from Israel's military might. Every battle had been won through divine power, not human strength. This should have built unshakable confidence in God's ability to protect and provide for his people in the future. These 3 verses serve as both a celebration of what God had accomplished and a reminder of his trustworthiness for whatever challenges lay ahead. When Israel faced future difficulties, they could look back to this moment and remember, our God keeps his promises, every single one. With the land settled and the Levitical cities established, it was time for the eastern tribes to return to their families across the Jordan River. They had faithfully fulfilled their promise to help conquer the western territories. Now they could go home to their wives, children, and livestock. But before they left, they did something that nearly caused a civil war. Chapter 22, verses 10 to 12, describe what happened. When they came to Geliloth near the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard that they had built the altar on the border of Canaan at Geliloth, near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. An imposing altar. This looked like rebellion against God's law, which required all sacrifices to be made at the tabernacle. The western tribes immediately assumed the worst. Their brothers were starting their own competing worship system and breaking their covenant with God. The reaction was swift and decisive. They prepared for war against their own people rather than allow covenant violation to go unchallenged. This shows how seriously they took their relationship with God. They were willing to fight their own relatives to protect the purity of worship. But before attacking, they sent a delegation to find out what was really going on. Verses 13-16 show their approach. So the Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, to the land of Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. With him, they sent 10 of the chief men, one from each of the tribes of Israel, each the head of a family division among the Israelite clans. When they went to Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they said to them, "The whole assembly of the Lord says, how could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him now?" They were genuinely heartbroken, thinking their brothers had abandoned God. They even reminded them of previous disasters that came from covenant breaking, like the sin at Peor, where thousands died because of idolatry. But the eastern tribes quickly explained the truth. Their response in verses 21-23 was passionate. The mighty one, God, the Lord. The mighty one, God, the Lord. He knows, and let Israel know. If this has been in rebellion or disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us this day. If we have built our own altar to turn away from the Lord and to offer burnt offerings and grain offerings, or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it, may the Lord himself call us to account. They weren't rebelling at all. They explained their real purpose in verses 24-27. But we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, "What do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you Reubenites and Gadites. You have no share in the Lord." So your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord. That is why we said, "Let us get ready and build an altar," but not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. On the contrary, it is to be a witness between us and you and the generations after us, that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowship offerings. The altar wasn't for competing worship. It was a memorial. They were worried that future generations might think the Jordan River was a spiritual boundary as well as a physical one. The altar would stand as permanent proof that the eastern tribes belonged to the same God and the same covenant as their western brothers. When Phinehas and the delegation heard this explanation, they were relieved and delighted. Verse 31 records Phinehas's response, "Today we know that the Lord is with us, because you have not been unfaithful to the Lord in this matter. Now you have rescued the Israelites from the Lord's hand." The crisis was over. Instead of civil war, there was celebration. The eastern tribes named their altar Ed, meaning witness, to commemorate its true purpose as a testimony to their unity with all Israel. Years passed peacefully in the Promised Land. Joshua grew old, and he knew his time as leader was coming to an end. He had one more crucial responsibility, preparing Israel for the future without him. Chapter 23, verse 1-2 sets the scene. After a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, and officials, and said to them, "I am very old." Joshua called together all the key leaders of Israel for his farewell address. This wasn't just a goodbye speech, it was a comprehensive review of God's faithfulness and a warning about future dangers. He began by reminding them of everything God had done. In verses 3-5, Joshua reviewed their recent history. "You yourselves, have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered, between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you, and you will take possession of their land, as the Lord your God promised you. Notice his emphasis. It was God who fought for them, not their own strength or strategy. This was a crucial point for them to remember. As they faced the future, their past victories came from divine power, and their future success would depend on maintaining their relationship with God. Then Joshua gave them specific instructions for staying faithful. Verse 6 contains his key command: be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the right or to the left. This wasn't just about individual behavior, it was about national survival. Joshua warned them about the greatest danger they would face: compromise with the remaining Canaanite peoples. In verses 7 to 8, he was explicit. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. But you are to hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have until now. Joshua knew that military conquest was easier than spiritual faithfulness. It's harder to resist gradual compromise than to fight a clear enemy. The Canaanites who remained in the land would constantly tempt Israel to adopt their religious practices and moral standards. His warning became more intense in verses 12 to 13. But if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your backs and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you. This wasn't just a possibility, it was a prediction. Joshua could see the pattern clearly. Compromise leads to corruption, corruption leads to covenant breaking, and covenant breaking leads to catastrophe. He ended his address with a personal testimony in verse 14. Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. One more time, Joshua emphasized God's perfect faithfulness. Every promise had been kept. This should have given Israel unshakable confidence in God's reliability for the future. Joshua had one more important gathering to organize. He called all the tribes to assemble at Shechem, a place with deep spiritual significance. This was where Abraham had first built an altar in the Promised Land, where Jacob had buried his family's foreign gods, and where God had renewed his covenant with his people. Chapter 24, verse 1, describes the gathering. Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. This wasn't just a political meeting, it was a sacred assembly in God's presence. Joshua was about to challenge the entire nation to make the most important decision of their lives. He began with a comprehensive history lesson, speaking as God's representative. Verses 2 to 13 contain God's own summary of Israel's story, starting with Abraham. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. God reminded them of the Egyptian slavery, the plagues, the Red Sea crossing, the wilderness wandering, and the recent conquests. He emphasized repeatedly that he had been the one acting on their behalf. I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians. I brought you out. I delivered you. I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build. This historical review wasn't just information, it was evidence. God was building a case for Israel's total loyalty based on his demonstrated faithfulness and love. Then came Joshua's famous challenge in verses 14-15. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Choose this day whom you will serve. This wasn't a suggestion, it was an ultimatum. Joshua was forcing them to make a clear public decision. No more fence-sitting, no more trying to serve God while keeping other options open. They had to choose. Joshua's personal declaration has become one of the most famous statements of faith in history. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Regardless of what others decided, Joshua's family was committed to God completely. People responded immediately in verse 16, "Far be it from us to forsake the Lord, to serve other gods." They recounted God's mighty works and declared their loyalty to him. But Joshua wasn't satisfied with their quick answer. He knew the human heart too well. In verses 19-20, he challenged them further. "You are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you." This wasn't pessimism, it was realism. Serving God requires total commitment, and Joshua wanted them to understand the seriousness of their promise. God's holiness demands complete devotion, not casual religion. The people insisted they were serious. Verse 21 records their firm response. "No, we will serve the Lord." Joshua made them repeat their commitment publicly and recorded it as a binding covenant. He set up a large stone as a witness to their promise and warned them that it would testify against them if they broke their word. The book of Joshua ends with 3 significant deaths that mark the end of an era. These weren't just personal tragedies. They were historical transitions that closed one chapter of Israel's story and opened another. First came Joshua himself. Chapter 24, verse 29 records his death simply, "After these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. Like Moses before him, Joshua was called the servant of the Lord, the highest title of honor for a leader in Israel. 110 years was a full, rich life. Joshua had been Moses' assistant during the wilderness years, led Israel across the Jordan, conquered the Promised Land, and overseen its division among the tribes. He had served faithfully from young adulthood to advanced old age. Verse 30 tells us where he was buried. "And they buried him in the land of his inheritance, at Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. He was laid to rest in the town he had built with his own hands, in the territory he had humbly requested, only after everyone else was satisfied." The next verse provides a powerful testimony to Joshua's leadership. Israel served the Lord throughout. The lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. As long as the generation that had witnessed God's mighty works was alive, the nation remained faithful. Joshua's influence extended even beyond his death through the leaders he had trained. The second death was that of Eleazar the priest, Aaron's son. Verse 33 briefly notes, "And Eleazar son of Aaron died and was buried at Gibeah, which had been allotted to his son Phinehas in the hill country of Ephraim." Eleazar had served alongside Joshua throughout the conquest and land division. He had cast the sacred lots that determined each tribe's inheritance and had overseen the spiritual aspects of Israel's settlement. But perhaps the most symbolic burial was mentioned in verse 32, "And Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem, in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem." This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. Joseph had died in Egypt almost 400 years earlier, but he had made his brothers promise to carry his bones to the promised land when God brought them home. Through all the years of slavery, through the wilderness wandering, through the conquest battles, they had carefully preserved Joseph's remains. Now finally, he was home. The burial site was significant, Shechem, where Jacob had first settled in the land, where Joshua had just renewed the covenant, and where Abraham had built his first altar. Joseph's bones were laid to rest in land his great-grandfather Jacob had purchased, connecting the end of the story back to its beginning. These three burials represented different aspects of Israel's journey. Joshua represented leadership and conquest. Eleazar represented spiritual guidance and proper worship. Joseph represented the long faithfulness of God's promises, kept across centuries of waiting. With these deaths, the conquest era was officially over. The next generation would face new challenges and opportunities, but they had a foundation built on God's faithfulness and the faithful service of leaders who had put God's glory above their own comfort. If this epic journey through Joshua has opened your eyes to God's incredible faithfulness and power, I want to ask you to do three things right now. First, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these life-changing biblical stories. Second, share this video with someone who needs to see God's promises in action. Maybe they're facing their own giants and need to be reminded that our God still fights for his people. And third, let me know in the comments which moment from Joshua's story impacted you the most. Remember, you're not just a spectator in these stories. You're part of God's ongoing epic of faithfulness. Your promised land is waiting. Your giants can be defeated. Your walls can come down, because the same God who gave Joshua victory is ready to give you victory too. Thanks for joining me on this amazing adventure through the book of Joshua. Until next time, be strong and courageous. Your God goes with you wherever you go.